All right, thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for coming today. Hopefully this will give you all of what you're looking for. It's great to see sort of a diverse audience here, and I think that everything that we're going to be presenting is going to be useful. Just to break it down, sort of what the journey is that we're going to be going on today, I'm going to start off and just do a very concise overview of what LEED ND is, how it was incorporated, why it's important, etc. And then I'm going to immediately hand it off to my partner, Cliff Lind, who's going to be talking about the actual application of LEED ND specifically for local governments. There are some great resources on the back of your brochure that I would encourage you to check out afterwards, but one of which is the Local Government's Guide to LEED ND that has some great examples and is really a fantastic planning tool. The other ones on there are as well. And then from there we're going to dive right into how actual cities, both locally and nationally, are using LEED ND to frame their policy and planning decisions. El Paso, Texas is a real leader as far as going deep with incorporating LEED ND into a number of their policies. Their comprehensive plan is founded on a number of ND principles, and they've actually codified some of the metrics of LEED ND within their code. And then the city of Lakewood, Colorado is pursuing LEED ND type of functionality on several fronts, and it's a great local example of a community that is really embracing sustainability. So, but then the meat of this is all going to be the interactive discussion afterwards, and so we're really hoping that we can get to some specific questions, that we don't leave this room without having your questions answered. And if they are somehow at the end of at noon o'clock or whenever it is that you decide to leave, those questions are not answered, I would encourage you to contact any one of our speakers. Certainly Cliff or I is able to and able and willing to answer any of these questions. So with that, I'm going to get started. What's really important to notice about LEED ND, LEED for Neighborhood Development, is that it is not created just unilaterally by the U.S. Green Building Council like every other LEED rating system is. In this case, it is a true collaboration, and one that was, as having been there sort of when a lot of this collaboration was happening, I can attest personally that it was a very messy collaboration, as these collaborations tend to be, with a number of agendas, a number of viewpoints, and everybody trying to get everything quantified just so. So it had these three entities, and I'm just going to briefly touch on the three individual ones as far as what they bring to the table, and you'll see that in fact their individual organizations are carried through into the actual rating system, the division of it. So the U.S. Green Building Council, notable for fancy, not necessarily fancy, I guess that's the wrong term, but very high-performing buildings across the sustainability spectrum, from energy to recycling to water, etc. They were certainly the key convener, and many of their inputs were captured within the rating system. The Congress for the New Urbanism really jumped on the urban design side of things, so looking to make places that are active and build community through form. And it's one of the fantastic aspects of this rating system is it actually seeks to quantify some of the urban design principles. So for example, there are maximum lengths in a facade that can be, or let's see, maximum lengths that cannot be broken with a certain, or you need to have a certain amount of minimum distance between doors, between entryways, or you need to have a certain amount of facade that is covered with glass at a for retail first floor uses, so that can be an active space. And there's the way that they've captured these metrics is a really fascinating part of the story, and as you'll see as we get into it, there's a heavy emphasis on that urban design component and the quantification thereof. And finally, the third party representing really smart growth and environmental concerns is the Natural Resources Defense Council, and they were certainly in the room and advocating constantly for, take the big picture, look at smart growth, look at land use planning, and try to figure out ways to best impact the environment in a positive manner. So that raises the question, why do we have LEED ND? This is somewhat of a stereotypical slide, just saying suburbia can have many negative aspects. Personally, I am actually an advocate in many ways of suburbanism done right. However, I think that it's fairly agreed upon today that the way that we have been doing our housing development is not sustainable from a long-term view, and so there is a real need to look at our land use patterns and how things are designed and how the actual buildings are designed in order to move forward in a more sustainable path from all sort of the triple bottom line aspects. Just a couple of quick sort of the two graphs of the presentation that I know of anyway. It's really interesting to me, and this is a slide I found from, and all of my sources are cited here, but if you look at the average, this is an office building, not a residential, not a home, but if you look at the average office building, the amount of energy, total KBTUs, that is consumed over the course of the day is actually already, the average office building, the slice in gray, the large slice in gray, is already, the energy consumed by that building is less than the total amount of energy to go to and from that building. So just making the point that the transportation, that's the driving force. That's the biggest chunk of energy, just from an overall perspective of how much energy is consumed on a day-to-day commute. And then if you look at a better building where you follow even a standard that's somewhat out of date, the ASHRAE 90.1 that was released in 2004, all of a sudden you have that transportation side of the slide taking up about 70% to the 30% that the building energy is going to be using of that energy pie for the day. So I found this to be somewhat of a revelation, pardon me, and I think that it really drives the point home that if you can affect transportation and land use patterns, then you affect overall energy in a much more significant way than just looking at the building alone. And so the other graph that I referenced, this is from the Jonathan Rose companies that they did a study for the EPA, just looking at things like location, so urban and suburban use, as well as looking at green, so greener transportation options as well as a greener home. You can see this huge jump from 125 million BTUs per year for the transportation side of suburban living immediately with the same house, the same 115 million MMBTU using house. It goes down to 28 instantly on the living in an urban scenario. And of course, you can go down to living green and then living finally in a multifamily. And this is preaching to the choir, so I'm not going to spend any time on that. But just the overall impact here is rather significant, and I think this graph does a good job of illustrating that. Finally, I turn to a critical news source, which you may be familiar with. Really expressing the fact that transportation is important. So public transit, if everybody else could get on public transit, I could get to work a lot quicker. So I would just like you all to keep that in mind with this particular slide. But I think it does a good job of sort of bringing a little bit of a more lighthearted view, but still illustrating the fact that public transit is a critical force for reducing the energy in our cities. So the final slide before I get into the meat of LEAD ND is talking about values. And this is really shifting the paradigm from sort of focusing on what is less bad, how do we not do things quite as bad, to not use as much energy in such a wasteful way, not use as much water in such a wasteful way, to really focusing on how do we get to encouraging more good and making thriving communities that encourage health and wellness, that encourage social justice, that kind of thing. And really, I believe that's at the core of the LEAD ND rating system, and it allows a framework for getting there. So just a question of values. So obviously the idea of why LEAD ND is sort of like your box of animal crackers. You don't know how effective something is without some sort of measurement, some sort of whether it's walkability or whether it's reduction in energy or whether it's sense of community. Without measurement, you're not going to get there. There's supposed to be another transition there to a LEAD ND nutrition label, but I guess that's not in there anymore. So where we get to, okay, so the system overall, this is how we quantify things. This is how we look at it. This is the overall slide for LEAD ND that looks at, these are the systems. The smart location and linkage, that really gets back to that smart growth. That really gets the Natural Resources Defense Council, their input. This is where you're located, what you're close to, some of those land use patterns. The neighborhood pattern and design, the second category, is really that urban design category, the Congress for the New Urbanism. Green infrastructure and building, obviously the U.S. Green Building Council, and I'll talk about the others here as I go through them. This is fairly standard across all of LEED rating systems. Just the only thing I would call to notice here is that there's a significant jump between gold and platinum. Notice that the other levels, it's 10 points. To get from gold to platinum is 20 points. So a platinum project is, across LEED building rating systems, is a significant jump. One of the very interesting differences of LEED ND compared to traditional LEED rating systems is that you can actually get certified at 3 different points along the process rather than just when the project is completed. The first stage of pre-review is really one that I think people in this room should be especially interested in. It's essentially the developer making commitments that they will follow this if they get their entitlements and if they are able to move forward. That is the idea. The reason why this level of certification exists is so they can send this letter into their local government and possibly help with expediting the permitting process. Once they've gotten those entitlements, typically most projects start at stage 2, which is certification of an approved plan. That's when you actually go through each credit, document it as a planned measure. It's not necessarily just the intention letters. And then you get your certification. And then finally, if you want the pretty plaque, that is stage 3, at the certification of a complete project, where you say, yes, we met everything that we were going to plan, or this came out different, etc. And this is what our final tally is. So that's a really unique characteristic of LEED ND. So I'm going to just go through the different categories, and then my presentation is going to be done. So the smart location and linkages, the first one, the smart growth, the NRDC, does have 27 points possible, the highest number of prerequisites. Rather than go through individual credits, I just want to really point out the big bundles of credits. So the first one is location, and if you're an infill as well as a redevelopment project, then you are going to get the most points. So that's all location. There's really, that one is going to be independent of what you do on the site. This is just where you are. But it's really saying choose good development pads, choose sites, develop near existing infrastructure. This is where, if you are a greenfield site in more of the suburbs, you won't get any of these points. And in some cases, you won't even be really allowed to, you won't meet some of these prerequisites. And then transit, of course. So proximity to transit, how many buses, how many ferries, how many trains that you can access on a weekday and a weekend are all factored in. And so those are the biggest bundles in that particular category. In the urban design side of things, there's only 3 prerequisites here. What we call urban design here is known as walkable streets in LEED ND lingo. That's the actual particular credit. What it really is that quantification of urban design, and that's going to get you the largest number of points here. Things like minimal setbacks. You get a certain number of, you get 1 point if all your building facades are within 25 feet of the property line. You get another point if they're within 18 feet of the property line. So just trying to encourage the kind of built form that we have here that's really close to the street, feels urban. They have such things as building height to street width ratios to sort of give you a sense of place with, they don't have a maximum. I think they're okay with New York and sort of feeling like a canyon, but they certainly do have minimums. And that's really what, just an example of this urban design. And then they also give you points for density, and then finally, being as critical as density is, and then finally they look at mixed income and a diverse typology of housing to make an interesting neighborhood. And by typology of housing, we're talking small units, big units, 3-story access by an elevator, 3-story walk-up, all of these different sort of characteristics. There's about 20 different buckets of housing types based on square footage and typology, and you jumble them all together and get a Simpson diversity index for all the biologists in the room. That sort of kicks out how diverse your housing types are, and then that's wrapped in with how affordable they are, and there's different levels that are specified in the more different levels, so it's sort of a Hope 6 model of having different levels of affordability throughout will give you the most points in that category. And this does talk, the one short editorial I'll put in here is it does talk a little bit about parking, which is sort of an area of personal interest and passion of mine. And it has some really good pointers for how parking can be done, as well as sort of emphasizing the importance of it. It doesn't give you a ton of credits directly for parking, but indirectly it does. There's sort of ways to, you get more points if you park if you park buildings in the rear and you have on-street parking, etc. Those are all, they're all wrapped in here, although not necessarily explicitly called out with a parking credit. Although there is a reduced parking footprint credit, but it's wrapped in even more so. And finally, the U.S. Green Building Council got this one in there. This is not to speak ill at all of our good friends at the U.S. Green Building Council, but there is a prerequisite that you actually have one additional LEED building within, and it doesn't have to be LEED. There are, as long as it meets a certain ISO certification, you can do it under Green Globes or something else within your development. They want to see some sort of additional commitment to green building within there, and then there's thresholds on energy efficiency, water efficiency, etc. If you make all the buildings inside as well as the entire neighborhood certified under LEED, that's probably the biggest major bundle. And then stormwater management is another one, which is very difficult here in Colorado with our water law, but I have seen projects get a couple points at least under this particular one. So the last two credits, you get 6 possible in the innovation and design, and this is really ideas that they did not think about through the rating system. So for instance, over at Block 3, a DHA project on Park Ave, they got an innovation and design credit for having the bicycle, the B-cycle station that was integrated into that project. And so it's something that it's a good idea. It helps from an ND perspective. It's not necessarily captured in the rating system. And then exemplary performance. If you're going to go and double the threshold of something that's in there, in many credits, they will give you an additional point for that. And finally, I believe this is my last slide. We're looking at regional priority. This is the attempt to regionalize the rating system. This is for this particular zip code. These were areas that the USGBC Colorado ND committee, which Cliff is now the chair of, worked at developing with stakeholders as saying these are the most important credits in Colorado per zip code. So in an urban scenario, it was determined that recycled content in infrastructure, in order to sort of build that industry, was pretty critical. Water efficient landscaping, because we are in the arid Mountain West. Compact development, but at a threshold of at least 38 dwelling units an acre was important. This reduced parking footprint, which I mentioned, transportation demand management, and then finally bicycle network and storage. If you do one of these just as part of standard practice through your LEED ND certification as a developer, then you will get a bonus point here. So that is the intensively quick crash course in LEED ND. We're going to shift gears to how we can use that if you're not a developer, if you are a local government, which I think is what most of you are here to hear, and I think frankly is a very effective use of that.